Welcome to LCS Talks. I'm Berkley Glazer. I'm the principal of the middle school campus at Langley Christian School. Today on the panel, I've got Joel Ditson with me. He is our principal of our high school campus. I've got Kevin Mirchandani with us, and he's our director of instruction at Langley Christian School. And our guest speaker today is Darren Spyksma from the Society of Christian Schools in British Columbia, and his position is director of learning. So Darren, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Berkley.
I just want you, Darren, to be able to share, well, first a little bit about what, and you're going to hear this acronym now, SCSBC, because we're just kind of inculcated with that acronym, and it's going to just come off our lips as we're talking. But that's the Society of Christian Schools for British Columbia. This is a parent organization that provides governance for some Christian schools that we belong to in British Columbia. And I believe we have 37 different schools represented. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Berkley.
Awesome. So they provide governance to us. So Darren, you can just share with us a little bit of the work that SCS has been doing to pave the way for our Christian schools to start into this conversation.
Yeah, great. It's been almost a decade that we have been working on this topic. It began with governance work and creating a matrix to help boards make decisions. And from that, we began working and created a document called Space for Dialogue that supported teachers in developing the skills that they would need to support students who may be struggling with some aspect of their sexuality or gender. And from that work came to the point where we realized we were talking about the same themes over and over again with people, and that produced the guiding principles document that we believe really helps school communities develop a coherent approach to a challenging topic in the lives of families, in the lives of kids, and in the community. And from there, we developed a video series to help communities have this challenging conversation in small groups. And the most recent document that's just about ready for publication is a framework for helping staff develop curriculum, K to 12, around relationships, sexuality, and gender.
That's great. That's really helpful. Thanks for painting the landscape for us there, Darren, with some of your work. So we're talking today about the SCSBC guidelines for shalom Christian communities. And so they've been really helpful just as we've looked at them and had some conversations about them. So Darren, I'm wondering if you could talk to us about some of the possibilities that exist in light of the guidelines for shalom Christian communities. And let's start by looking at one of them on the concept of belonging. So I'll read that for our listeners here. Beyond care, we foster a culture of belonging for all in our community. We desire to be a community of belonging, demonstrating the radical and expansive love of God to all, particularly the vulnerable, marginalized. Jesus affirmed this in his profound interactions with the Samaritan woman at the well in John 4, the adulterous woman at the temple, John 8, and the tax collector, Zacchaeus, in Luke 19. We commit to living and sharing the deep truth of God's love to all and for all. So Darren, if you could talk to us a little about some of your insights and what you've done with some of the work in a number of Christian schools to support this concept.
The first line is really important. Beyond care. We have a duty of care, which is actually our legal obligation as schools. If you're a school in British Columbia, you have an obligation to care for all students who enter the door. That's a legal obligation. But our call is greater than the legal obligation. It's a call to partner with families, to connect with students and help them develop holistically into who God intended them to be, and to be a place of learning. And students who don't belong actually don't learn, and there's scientific backing for that. That belonging is a key part of developing in a healthy way. So there's the basic fundamental common sense around science of belonging, but then there is also this radical concept of everyone is created in the image of God, and we meet them where they're at, as they're at, and walk with them in community as a sense of belonging.
Yeah, so that's really helpful there, Darren. I wonder if you could talk us through some of those passages, John 4, John 8, or Luke 19, maybe to pick one of them. And we've been talking about Jesus's posture for a number of weeks on our podcast. What stands out to you when you think of Jesus in these examples of engaging with people?
Now, I had the benefit of growing up in a home that pursued a life following Christ very actively. And one of the ways that was shown on our mantle was a stone and on the stone it said the first stone. And so as for me, that's a personal story that I just connect with. You know, he who has no sin can throw the first stone. And the other stories have different nuance that I think actually helps this conversation. But for me personally, that's the one that just stands out for me as I'm interacting with people I disagree with people who are struggling with where they're at in their faith, the whole myriad of things that we struggle with in society right now. To me, that guides me the most, and really speaks again to posture.
Thanks, Darren. One of the guiding principles that struck me as I was looking through was a principle titled unity, not uniformity. And I have a question for you on it. I'll just read it as well for our listeners here. And the principle says, we resist the threat that contentious topics will divide our community. We commit to respectful dialogue, striving always for unity as Jesus prayed in John 17, that we may be one even as God is one, so that the world may believe and know that they are loved by Jesus. Notwithstanding our common unity of purpose, we recognize that diversity exists in our community and resist the need for uniformity, respectfully honoring diversity within the context of our foundations, of our school. I guess my question that comes out of that is just recognizing, in our communities at LCS, that diversity clearly exists in our community. How do we actively go about resisting that threat that contentious topics will divide our community? And how do we strive for unity instead of uniformity and still entertain those discussions and respect that diversity that exists?
That's a great question. There's probably a doctoral thesis just on that question. But to me, it comes to, and why we have these guiding principles, it invites us in those moments where we forget. Hopefully we're in community and someone in our community, in our circle, can say, actually remember, we're actually not aiming for uniformity here. We're aiming for unity around a key set of principles, a key way of being, and a key posture. And Christian schools historically have actually done an amazing job of this. Non-denominational Christian schools, this is not the first topic that has threatened to divide communities in the Christian, in history. There was a time in my childhood where I went to school that was fairly traditional, conservative. If a teacher got divorced, they were probably getting fired and probably not getting hired again. And we just don't hear about that anymore. The Christian community has found a way to navigate brokenness in that space, and we just don't hear about that anymore. Baptism sounds strange, but that's a topic in history. Like, people burned at the stake because of how they felt about baptism at the hands of other Christians. And I guess we're saying there are things that unite Christians, primarily the life of Christ and the example that gives us as we move forward in society and what Christ's call is on our life. And the other things are important, and they're important to wrestle with. So we're not suggesting we don't talk about these things, but we wrestle with them in community and say, this is what we commit to, and these other things we're going to continue to work with and wrestle with, but it won't divide us. We're not going to allow it to divide us. And I think that the only way unity, not uniformity, works is if community members are actually committed to the hard work that is represented in this number.
Your response helps me to just reflect on another principle that is in this set of guidelines, and that's the discipleship versus doctrine. And very much what you described, and for the readers, I'll just read this caption here, where discipleship is relational, it's process-oriented and respectful of one another, whereas doctrine articulates a specific thought or ideas espoused by a church or a Christian organization. And so, doctrine will be articulated in policy, but curriculum and what we do with the kids is discipleship. And so very much how you responded to the last question, Darren, really reminded me of that.
Yeah, and that's a challenging one. My boss, Ed Newton, and I argue about this one all the time. And this is sort of what we're hoping these principles actually are for schools. They're intentionally made to be adjusted and adapted to individual communities. We've had some communities add other guiding principles. We've had some communities merge them because they thought 9 was too many, and that's what we're hoping for. This is not about accept SCSBC's guiding principles. It's about use these as a launching pad for a community to develop it. Because for me, if I think of my own Christian walk, it is discipleship that has allowed me to develop in my faith. The times in my life where truth was wielded as a weapon did not actually nurture me in my faith, but the people that were willing to do the hard work of walking with a volatile, depressed adolescent discipled me. And I sit around this table today because of that discipleship, not because someone told me what I knew already, which was I'm struggling with something here, and I'm going to tell you you're bad as a result. And ultimately, we don't want to ignore truth. I'm not suggesting that, but I would argue we start with discipleship.
That's really helpful.
And truth comes out of discipleship. And people ask, well, when's the right time, Darren? And I would argue when the person you're spending time with asks you. I have people in my life that I ask. I say, you know, I have a spiritual mentor, and I say to him, like, give me some feedback on. And then he sticks me. But I've invited him to speak truth into my life. And too often we want to jump to truth without discipleship. And I think that's where we end up doing more harm than we would like to imagine as Christian educators.
Yeah. Thanks, Darren. Let's bring things together around that idea of what it means to be a shalom Christian community. Any examples or stories that you leave us with to challenge us as we continue on in our learning journey ahead?
I return to the Gospels for my inspiration and for the sort of motivation to keep doing this hard work. But the story I'll leave you with is I had a grandmother who I was working with as part of a working group at a school. And at one point she said to me, but Darren, you've answered a lot of my questions, but there's one question you just haven't answered. And she was being 100% genuine. And I'm glad I didn't laugh, because at first I thought she was kind of joking, but she sincerely said, but Darren, how do these kids get into school in the first place? And I said to her, how many grandkids do you have in the school? And she very proudly, appropriately puffed up, I've got 11 grandkids. And I said, well, when your children were doing admissions, I'm fairly certain there were no questions about gender identity or sexual orientation or anything like that. And for her, it suddenly realized, and for the people sitting around the table, that there is no us and them in this conversation. This is just an us conversation. And we just hope that these guiding principles give communities a posture to engage as we support families. Because this isn't just an individual child that we're talking about. We're talking about families on a journey together. And we're hoping that these guiding principles give a context for that.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much, guys, for
Thanks,
participating today. Really appreciate you taking some time to be with us. And to our listeners, again, you can check us out on our website, langleychristian.com, and it's LCS Talks. And you can subscribe to that, and you'll get links to when we post these podcasts. Thanks for listening.